Hi, everyone. Welcome back to WorkTech. I'm George LaRocque, and I'm excited to introduce the WorkTech community to Sonar Talent, a recruiting orchestration platform that provides the tools and insights to help companies hire and retain the best talent. And today I'm joined by co-founder and CEO Chris Mannion to learn more about Sonar Talent. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, George. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you live on the air.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And for those who don't know, I mean, I've had the pleasure of working with you through the Impact WorkTech Accelerator, so I know all about Sonar Talent. But for those who don't know you or Sonar Talent, can you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about Sonar Talent?
Of course, yeah. So my background is not necessarily in HR. It's only recently I moved into the space. I just started in operations and engineering, half in the Royal Navy as an aerospace engineer, and then I moved into logistics and supply chain and e-commerce at Amazon and then at Wayfair. And so a lot of my career had been around solving problems, finding, fixing, and then building systems to try and make sure those problems didn't happen again. But around 2018, I noticed that the biggest problem we had in supply chain was not anything that was happening in the system. It was actually the ability to hire and retain really good people. And so I got a little bit more curious about this and was a little frustrated. I actually didn't know how to solve the problem at the time. And then when I spoke to my peers, they said, yep, that's a HR problem. HR is just a cost center, not very innovative. That problem's not going to get solved. And it didn't really sit right with me. And so as I was moving jobs in 2018, I had an offer to move to a really good internal team in a different part of the business, or into the HR team and actually try and solve this problem. And when I actually interviewed with the team, I couldn't believe how driven, how great the culture was, how great the leadership was, how much data was actually being used to drive decisions. And it just really sparked my interest. So I moved into recruiting in 2018, took over a 25-person recruiting team. We're very fortunate that my manager, the head of TA, Deborah, at the time, had also moved from the business, and she was able to help me understand how everything I'd done in the business translated to recruiting. Fast forward a year, I was building our first talent intelligence function. Had a team of about 35 people doing various different aspects of recruiting ops, analytics, product. And it was an incredibly fascinating space. Went through a lot over kind of COVID, and then coming out of COVID, and then the e-commerce boom. And around a year ago, I decided to actually take everything I'd learned, move outside of what was an incredible role at Wayfair and actually start Sonar Talent, and have been working on it for the last 18 months and incredibly excited to see the progress we've made.
Yeah, that's great. I did not know about the Royal Navy background, and I'm a big believer that, so I know that so much of what we use in corporate America comes from the military, from a talent management and leadership model perspective, which is good and bad. And I come from that environment too. So that's interesting to learn about you. But you're also a living, breathing example of, I talk a lot about one of the biggest changes in the market are the leaders that are in the space on the HR and talent side, as well as folks that are bringing new products to market. And that's I like the way you sort of package your background, coming from the military to corporate to the HR side of corporate. I think the audience will love to hear more about your work at Sonar Talent. So tell us more about Sonar Talent. What is it, and what does it do for an employer?
Of course, yeah. So it kind of really stems from one of the beliefs that I had, that if you can make the hiring process more efficient, but also more equitable, you can actually solve two big problems that we see in the talent market right now. And I feel like one of those big problems was that right now, the way that we hire and the way we've pretty much always hired is we try and find someone who's already doing the job at a competitive company and move that person into a new role. But from my experience throughout my career, I'd never done a job that I knew how to do. And so I was always transitioning. And this comes a lot from career development in the military, where you can't hire an admiral from the market, you have to train and grow them internally. And so that kind of model of career development came from that. And so what I was trying to figure out is how do we actually apply that to the talent market? And I felt like there was a huge gap in the space where there actually wasn't that availability of data across recruiters and candidates and hiring managers to really understand who could actually do a job effectively. So essentially what we're building at Sonar is a talent intelligence platform that unlocks access to this data and allows companies to make more equitable hiring decisions based on knowledge, skills, competencies, and avoid defaulting to the bias-driven markers like what school you went to, what company you worked for, or who's in your network and who can refer you. And so that's where we started. But as we've really explored the market in much more detail, the focus really now is on helping recruiting leaders understand how to orchestrate their entire recruiting process. So bringing everything that we learned in supply chain and that has really overhauled the supply chain industry over the last 50 years into the recruiting space, given that the challenge now is not necessarily on hiring as many people as you can, but actually on hiring the right number of people at the right time in order to hit specific headcount goals and achieve business objectives. And so we're taking this product to market essentially right now, and very excited to be able to help HR and TA leaders really kind of drive a more data-driven talent strategy using our platform.
Yeah, I like the supply chain analogy. We've used it in the market before, just speaking to the flow of candidates, almost very in a cold manner, right? Like sort of widgets. But this is more about understanding the business goal and understanding that there's agility needed, right? It's the way you described it. It's today it might be that there's a complete lack of talent and our hiring demands are high. Tomorrow it might be that our demands are moderate and the talent supply is high, or how do we balance that? And it shifts. It can shift what feels like overnight, but how do you orchestrate your resources in response to that in order to stay on goal? And that's a data play, right? That's when you talk about intelligence, that's more than just reporting, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you help with the actual orchestration, or what's the vision on that?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a number of different stages. And if you think about how headcount planning and recruiting capacity planning happens right now, quite often it happens around about this time of year when headcount goals are being set for the following year. And so we'll try and figure out, where do we need to focus our attention? What does attrition look like? What does growth look like across different teams? How do we structure our recruiting plan? And then how do we staff the recruiting team in order to meet that recruiting plan? Where do we outsource? Where do we insource? So all that kind of good stuff. But then we're working in the market now, which is so dynamic that plan is probably outdated within a few weeks. But recruiting leaders often don't have that analytical support in order to really pull all that information in and understand how changes in the market, changes in the internal kind of talent environment, even changes in the recruiting process that kind of sit within the applicant tracking system are actually going to impact that plan. And so what we're trying to do with intelligence is take that kind of baseline of what is right now a mishmash of different spreadsheets across many different drives, and no one knows which is the most current assumption, actually put that into one platform, but then bring all that internal and external data to show how that plan changes in real time. So a use case may be, we were hiring software engineers, and we had to hire maybe 1,000 software engineers a year just to stay at the kind of growth rate that we need to achieve in order to backfill attrition and kind of grow the right teams. Now, as soon as Amazon opened a dev center in the same town that we were based in, all of a sudden we had to then start to account for, what does that do to our recruiting plan? How does that affect internal attrition if people are being poached and our best people? How does that actually relate to the different teams that are being targeted? So could it be that our NLP teams are actually more of our natural language processing teams are more of a kind of focus? And how can we infer that from the different job postings and the timeline and the seniority and the skills that are required? So there's actually a whole depth of information that's there that most of it is available publicly, but is probably not sitting in front of the recruiting leader who needs to make a decision on how they adjust to that plan. So essentially what we're trying to do is bring in all that information and not just present it in a dashboard, as you said, but actually present that information in the form of a recommendation for how to improve and how to account for that different kind of dynamic market that is going to affect the recruiting plan. And then kind of like work all the way through to then identify different workflow changes that can be made in order to improve performance. And really, ultimately, the goal is to help that recruiting leader hit their target without over or under hiring by the end of the year.
Yeah, I love that. It's one of the things I've been saying lately is, people data is business data, and vice versa, right? So you started out by talking about your journey into this space, and it wasn't computing that, oh, that's an HR problem over there. And that probably typifies a lot of the issues that we see when it comes to this kind of intelligence. And it sounds like you're using external data. You talked about, job ad data, labor market data. You're talking about data that's definitely coming from the recruiting stack, right? From the ATS, sourcing tools, other tools, the HR side of things on the retention type metrics, but also the business data. What's the impact to the team? That's a really interesting place to be. And so what does your customer look like? Like, who are you? Who's your target customer from a profile perspective? What types of companies?
Yeah, so I think there's a sweet spot where we're looking at companies that have a huge hiring demand that is just really starting to ramp up. So you think anyone that has just received funding from the CHIPS Act, or any early stage tech company that has just received a lot of funding and needs to start to scale, but actually don't already have a recruiting process in place or don't have a huge recruiting function. So it's kind of beyond the founder-led recruiting or kind of the outsourced recruiting, where the team really believe that they should be improving their recruiting process, but actually not so big that the company already has a recruiting operations and analytics team in place, maybe a talent intelligence function who is already doing this process. Because essentially what we're doing is bringing a lot of those tools that a 5,000 person tech company might already have in place, actually bringing it to the 500 person kind of mid-market supply chain technology or manufacturing company. And so they're the companies that we've been talking to over the last few months, and we're really excited to bring that to market. And that really builds on the experience that we've had really testing different approaches over the last year with mostly venture-backed startups. So looking at the Series B to G stage, where they have a hiring goal of maybe 50 to 100 people over the course of a year, and actually just really need to think about new ways to optimize their recruitment process without just adding more recruiters to the team or just spamming more of the same prospects that everyone else is spamming.
Yeah. So what are you hearing back from the folks that you're talking to right now, the folks that are getting a look at the product and so forth? What are they asking for? What does success look like for them?
Yeah, so the initial product was focused on helping with the problem at the time, which 9 months ago was we can't hire fast enough, and so we were helping them to understand how they can access more of the market through outbound sourcing. As we've gone through the summer and with the hiring slowdown in the tech industry that we're focused on, we've actually heard a lot more requests for understanding how to actually hit specific goals and not overhire, given that it's probably going to lead to layoffs, which is one of the kind of key causes that we've seen. And so we're actually hearing a lot more requests for very specific guidance on how to plan capacity to hit goals, how to account for the different kind of like market dynamics. We can't predict the future, but what we can do is update models in real time that they may not have the capability to do if they don't have a team of analysts who are constantly watching what's happening. And so that's the kind of main request that we're seeing from the customers we've been working with. And I think going into the new year, what we're really looking at is not necessarily helping companies to hire as many as they can, but to think more about post-hire performance and making sure they're hiring the right people, that they have a great onboarding experience, that they kind of see the right path internally, and that they can actually build a career at the company that they're hired for. And the challenge with that is that we should see attrition go down over time, but we have to put in the numbers before we can actually start to see the results of that. And that's one of the, I think, big hurdles that we'll need to overcome as we kind of bring this kind of new intelligence to the market.
Yeah. It's all of this is so interesting because I talk a lot about how everything we talked about starting in the 90s and early 2000s with data becoming the new oil, with I can't stand the war for talent phrase, but it was the name of the book that got everybody paying attention to the skills issues, the workforce aging out, the world becoming more flat, and small businesses in small towns in the US competing with big businesses in Europe and medium-sized businesses in Latin America, not just for business, but now for talent. And your product is sitting in this place where those medium-sized, growing businesses are competing to retain and find talent. And they don't have the resources to manage the analytics function on that. That's an interesting, it's interesting timing, because as we've talked about, some recent research we've done has shown that in the middle market and even in the SMB, analytics from an HR technology, work technology perspective is one of the big investments that companies are making. And 10 years ago, I would have never believed that was the case. Analytics was an enterprise product, and so it's an interesting timing. And I think I'm not surprised that you've been as being responsive to your customers, that it's led you in this place, given the kind of intelligence that your product brings to the market. So what's next? And maybe we've been talking a little bit about what's next, but what's next for the company and the product and so forth?
Yeah, so right now we're signing a few design partners to really bring this product to market. So we're doing a lot more personal one-on-one work with a few organizations as they need to use different aspects of what we're building within the platform. So that will go live within the next few weeks, really. Yep. And at that point, we'll probably do a fundraise so we can actually start to build the team out. Right now, it's my co-founder, Junjay, and I who are kind of really working on this. And so as we start to kind of scale the team, we'll be able to actually bring a lot more of the product roadmap forward. And one of the big parts of the product roadmap we're focusing on is trying to meet the end user where they are. So what we don't want to do is create a whole bunch of additional tabs that these users will actually have to go to figure out what's going on, but actually to integrate into their workflow, whether that's in their ATS or in their Slack or Teams, or however they need to access information, and allowing them to essentially use the product without feeling like they're using the product. And I think that's where the whole orchestration theme, I think, hopefully really sits. Yeah, that makes good sense. So where can folks go to learn more about the company, the product, and where you're headed? Yeah, so we have a website, sonartalent.com, and there's a blog on there which I talk a little bit more detail about some of the things that we've been working on. I'm very active on LinkedIn as well, Christopher Mannion, which should be fairly easy to find. So would love to chat to anyone who has any thoughts or ideas about the space, and I appreciate any ideation on this. Yeah, well, I really appreciate your being here today. Thanks for sharing your journey and the story about Sonar Talent and the product with WorkTech. Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you, George. And thanks everyone for watching and or listening. And until next time.